Spanish Announce Table. You're very welcome back. And myself, Wayne Madden, here. Now, for those of you who are regular listeners to the show, you will be aware of how obsessed I am with video games. And obviously, being a wrestling show, it goes hand in hand that wrestling video games are something of an obsession. Now, we've talked about this a lot on the show. Last week, myself and James Chilvers had a great debate with Neil McGeever over the best wrestling game of all time. And eagle-eye, keen listeners may have heard me refer to a game by the name of Retromania. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Retromania Wrestling in just a second, because I have to say this is a bit of a first for me. I'm delighted to announce that we have an actual games developer with us, and it is, of course, the wonderful, from Retrosoft Studios, Mr. Michael Hermann. Michael, how you doing? You all right?
Good. How you doing?
I'm good. I have to say, this is definitely a first for me, because in terms of interviewing a game developer, it is absolutely delighting. I'm delighted to kind of merge those two worlds. Rarely are we able on the show getting to cross gaming with wrestling. So I suppose the first thing first, Retromania Wrestling. What's it all about?
As a child, I was pretty obsessed with WrestleFest, the arcade game.
Yeah.
Probably it's my favorite game of all time, and it's the first game when I discovered emulators. It's the first ROM I found to download and play. So I really love that game, and was really disappointed when it never came out to the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo, which was around that time frame when the game was released. And I've since learned, due to licensing issues, that's why that happened.
Yes.
So I was waiting for them to remake it or come out with something for the home consoles, and no one was doing it. And then they teased me with THQ did a WrestleFest iPad game.
That's right, yeah.
Back in 2012, but it wasn't really my cup of tea. I wasn't crazy about the cell shading that they did, and the gameplay isn't great, I don't think, on an iPad for it. So I waited a couple more years, and I'm like, you know what, I'll do it myself. So that's kind of how Retromania got started back in end of 2017.
Okay, fantastic. And I mean, it's interesting, briefly, of course, WrestleFest on the iPad, no longer available. And actually, a lot of people that you'll talk to, you'll say, oh, yeah, there was a WrestleFest, like vaguely on the iPad for about 6 months to a year. And they had John Cena against the Ultimate Warrior, I think. Yeah. But no, it's like, unless you bought it at the time, nobody has it anymore except for YouTube videos. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame, and that's the way, like, some video games were going to be lost through that process in the online-only age, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. And it says a lot because, of course, as you mentioned yourself, originally WrestleFest, you would play it in the arcade. And then it got to that point where, especially in the 90s, when computer, technology started advancing, there was a lot of like archiving of that sort of digital, moving that stuff from the arcade to digital. So it was great that the emulators were able to play those classic arcade games. Turtles in Time is another example from Konami. Yeah, absolutely. But I must ask you then, so what is your background? How did you get involved in this whole world?
Yeah, so I went to school for accounting, actually.
Okay.
Then got I got my master's in software engineering. So I co-own another business that is accounting and finance software implementation. So we sell like Microsoft products and implement them and integrate them with other systems. So I do have a background in software, but not game development.
Okay.
So this is I started this studio around 2017. This is our first game that we're doing. And I'm the least experienced person on the team from a game development standpoint. So I have a lot of business knowledge, and I have general programming knowledge as well. Not that I get too deep into code, barely at all.
Sure.
Just troubleshooting stuff. I may get into some stuff, but I can understand programming concepts. So it helped. I did write the design document for the game and all that. So
yes.
Yeah, as exciting as accounting and finance is, I've always wanted to do a game, and I figured if I didn't do it now, when was I going to do it? I'm not that I'm old, but I'm in my 40s now, and
sure.
I still had the passion to do it, so I figured if not now, when?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously, regardless of maybe experience in other games, when it comes to having passion, you're probably the person who's the most passionate on the entire project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I don't know. One other guy helps me. His name is Wade. He's from Australia, who is as much as an obsessive WrestleFest fan as I am. So he's been instrumental in helping in all aspects of the game development, game design, and everything. So
fantastic. I mean, we will get to that in just a second in terms of WrestleFest, but actually one thing that kind of came to mind when you were talking about that. So before we came on air, we were speaking briefly about the fact that you have a member of your production team in Vietnam, and you've mentioned another individual in Australia. You, I believe, are based in Pennsylvania in the United States. So there is a huge sort of like global initiative here. How did this team ever come together? I mean, is it just the idea of chatting on a forum somewhere, or?
It was my idea, and then I basically grew the team. Okay. So I first started, and I had to decide, all right, what engine am I going to do this in? And I started prototyping something in an engine called Game Maker Studio, which is really a 2D engine. Okay. Unlike maybe Unreal and Unity, which are more 3D based, which can definitely do 2D, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But Game Maker's really catered to 2D people. And I had Charles is the name of the lead programmer. I had him help me do a prototype of it, and we got along really well, and I was like, let's do it in Game Maker, I didn't really see any drawbacks of doing it. So that's how Charles got hired. He happened to be in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. I have previous relationships with a couple artists in Spain.
Okay.
So they do all the caricatures that are on our website, the story mode artwork, and a bunch of other stuff in the game. So they're out of Spain. I've since hired people in Indonesia. Another artist out of Indonesia who's been working with me for over a year now. Another one in Brazil who did all the animations.
Wow.
Where else? New Zealand? Or no. I have another artist in Australia as well, on top of the guy who helps me with programming. So there's 2 people in Australia. Where else? And a couple other places as well. Okay. Ukraine, I have somebody in the Ukraine who does kind of tools that we're using with the engine. And then the UK, we have a couple people out of the UK.
Wow.
So we're represented on 5 continents.
That's fantastic. I mean, I was going to say it reminds me of, funny enough, it kind of reminds me of that Street Fighter 2 menu for the arcade where they fly from continent to continent. And it's funny because one of the caricatures that was done when I think you guys were announcing the USSR Koloff. That's right. And the plane flew over there, and I was like, that kind of totally takes me back to Street Fighter.
That was a nod to Street Fighter. So I made that little graphic real quick.
Oh, very cool.
The logos on the map are our wrestler logos. So I have Tommy Dreamer's logo in Pennsylvania. Johnny Retro's from California, so that's up there. Zach Sabre Jr.'s in the UK, so his logo was there. And then it's my voice saying USSR.
Fantastic.
I want to make sure I didn't infringe on anybody's copyright. So.
It's good. I mean, the caricatures. Obviously, you mentioned the team in Spain. The caricatures are fantastic, very visual. Yeah. Certainly, it's one of the first things that drew my attention to the game when I was sort of looking online and I'd first come across it. So, I suppose one question I need to ask straight away. You've mentioned as well, of course, the spiritual successor or the official successor to WrestleFest. Now, originally, I believe you guys began as that spiritual successor, but then actually that step was taken to become the official successor to WrestleFest. How does that happen? How did that happen for you guys?
Yeah, so the original developers of WrestleFest was a company named Technos in Japan.
Okay.
So before WrestleFest, they made Superstars, Mat Mania, the Big Pro Wrestling, I think Tag Team Wrestling, which I think is another version of the Big Pro Wrestling, but that came in the U.S. Then they went bankrupt and stopped making games. Their library was sold. They're also known for like Double Dragon, River City Ransom. They did all those games. So those that IP got sold to another company, who then sold it to Arc System Works, the makers of Blaze Blue, Guilty Gear, those fighting games, those kind of anime-style fighting games. So I found that out. I randomly started messaging people that work there on LinkedIn, because they had a U.S. office. They're based in Japan, but at a U.S. office. So I finally got hold of someone who actually didn't work there anymore, but knew the person I needed to talk to about licensing it. So they had to go back and forth with Japan, and we eventually came to an agreement. This was probably an 8-9 month process.
Wow.
And it was important to me, just, I'm really want to pay respects, or however you want, to those original creators who did WrestleFest. Like, I spent so much time as that game growing up, and I wanted to be, like, I wanted to take it, like, what if they had a WrestleFest 2 that would have came out in 93, 94? What would they have been able to put on, let alone 30 years later, now that, I have none of the technological limitations that they had. I don't have to worry about the number of colors on screen, the amount of memory in the arcade board. I can do a whole bunch of stuff that they just couldn't do. But I still love the whole art style and the presentation that they had. So we got the IP, and then we're the official sequel.
Fantastic. And I think it's really important that you've said that about the artwork and the design, because something for games, wrestling games, I don't know about yourself, but the last couple of years, especially with the 2K series, there has been an overcomplication of wrestling games. They've become very technical, very difficult almost to play. Even as a new gamer coming in, you would pick this up and go, I'm not sure what to do here. One of my favorite wrestling games of all time was WWF In Your House, mainly because of the 2D, the sprite, the Mortal Kombat homage. And of course, Acclaim made that and made it very well. And even now, it's still pick up and playable. You could play that game today. And so, I mean, your project, Retromania Wrestling, very much from the ground off, I'm presuming, was that kind of pick up and play arcade 2D brawler, not the sort of technical thing of trying to figure out how to do the armbar or the takedown, but just having a bit of fun with wrestlers.
Absolutely. So our controls are pretty simple. You auto grapple, kind of like all the WrestleFest did, Superstars did, Mat Mania, even Pro Wrestling for the NES had this mechanic. Auto grapple, then whoever, it's a timing randomness thing, so you don't have to have the timing exact. So it's like, if you're familiar with Fire Pro Wrestling, it's more precise. We wanted more of an arcade. We wanted not necessarily the best person to always win, kind of, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit of randomness to it. There's a little bit of button mashing to it. So, if I've never played before, I'll still have a chance to do some cool stuff, And that was really important to us. So, but there were some limitations to WrestleFest where there was a very limited number of moves you could do. You couldn't really decide what move you could do. You kind of randomly got picked from a pool of moves. So we definitely added some more aspects of a little bit more control, but without getting, you never have to memorize. It's like up and up and punch is a move. Left and punch is a move, and that's it. That's like, we have 3 attack buttons and that's it.
So, I mean, this is something I think that it's fair to say a lot of gaming fans, but a lot of wrestling fans who are gamers, and there is a lot of crossover between those two worlds, of course, but they've been calling for that for the last couple of years. And certainly it's something, I mean, I think the nearest comparison was probably about a decade or more ago now with WWE All-Stars. Something like that was probably the nearest comparative thing. And to be honest, many of us wondered why they didn't just continue doing that format. But to be honest now, when we think of the roster, because this is obviously something where it definitely caught my attention, but something that will catch a lot of people's attention. So How many people in the game? Because I know as of yesterday you finalized your roster, and I found out who the last two were, and I was like, thank God. But let's say, so who can we say is in the game? How many wrestlers? And importantly, and probably critically, could we see the possibility of DLC to add more at a future time?
Yeah, so 16 rosters we're going to have, or 16 wrestlers we're going to have at launch. And we'll go through them. DLC, it just really depends on success of the game.
Yes.
So
yes.
If we do our job right and it's a fun game to play, we'll build our audience. I'm confident of that.
Yeah.
And then we definitely want to keep releasing future content. And it'll be like a kind of combination of paid and free DLC. As much as we can do to put in, we want to give like free game modes, updates, if we do presentation or logic or tweaks to wrestlers, all that stuff is free. The only thing we really would charge for is if we have to go out of pocket to spend on licensing, right?
Yeah.
Because depending on who we can secure, licensing may cost a decent amount of money, and we're a really small company, so we would probably charge for licensed wrestlers, but additional game modes, additional arenas, we'll put in the game, and we'll do a combination of free. Because I have kids. And I'm sick of I don't know how much money I've spent in Fortnite over the last couple of years.
Oh man!
And I don't love that model.
No.
Now I get it. Video games haven't really changed in price. They've probably gotten cheaper since when we were kids. Because the prices haven't changed. So I get why developers are doing it, and they're spending so much money developing these games. It's tough to sell them for what they're at. So I get that, but at the same time, I want to give as much value to people that get the game as well. So that's kind of our stance on that. But as far as our current roster, we got the Road Warriors in, the original boss of WrestleFest.
Yeah.
So they're in the game. Tommy Dreamer.
Phenomenal, of course.
ECW fame. Yeah.
Yes.
The NWA and and Nick Aldis, the Real World's champion.
Mm-hmm.
We also have Zack Sabre Jr.
Of
Jeff
course.
Cobb, some up-and-coming guys. Colt Cabana, Andy Legend.
Fantastic.
Austin Idol, back from Memphis Wrestling, where he was really big, and NWA in general.
Absolutely.
We've announced everybody. Our two announcements yesterday were Matt Cardona and Brian Myers, formerly in the WWE.
Oh, yeah.
As Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins. Nikita Koloff, the Russian Nightmare.
Yes.
Johnny...
sorry, no, I was gonna say the BWO, of course, the entire BWO.
The entire BWO for the first time. Big Stevie Cool, Hollywood Nova, and the blue guy, the Blue Meanie.
Yeah.
And then the star of our story mode, who is not Johnny Impact, not Johnny Nitro, not Johnny Mundo, but Johnny Retro.
I know, right? Amazing. I mean, there's many questions, there's questions as to how do you get Stevie Richards and the Blue Meanie in a game, but actually, the question also comes up, Tommy Dreamer, was he like living next door in Pennsylvania? Because he's done a lot of promo stuff for you, so I mean, did you have him on speed dial or something?
Well, no, I do have his number. I've talked to him a couple times. I've met him a couple times now.
Amazing.
Great guy. But my in there was a gentleman working on the game with me by the name of Mike Archer, who actually worked at Acclaim previously.
Oh,
he also worked at the WWE for a number of years.
Wow.
So he actually went to wrestling school with Tommy.
Oh, cool.
Back a long, long time ago. And then knew him through WWE. And, Mike never finished wrestling school. He dropped out after a year or so. But he by working with WWE has a ton of contacts. He's been friendly with Tommy since then. Yeah. So he was one of the first people we called once Mike came on board, was to get Tommy on board. And then Tommy's helped by spreading the word. And with Mike's contacts, we've been able to get a hold of all these guys and get them signed.
Phenomenal. Now, I mean, it's fair to say as well. So let's talk as well about some of the platforms that this game is coming out on. PC, Nintendo Switch, which is fantastic to see.
Yep.
PS4 and Xbox One. This is now slated for a June release. July, excuse me,
Yeah.
because I'm impatient, because I'm here in the UK. I am going to ask you: is there a demo coming beforehand? Do we have an idea of? I know some people on Switch can pre-order it. When do we expect the pre-order on Xbox, or what's the general sort of thing there? Yeah.
So due to the different companies' rules, we're only allowed to offer Switch pre-orders on our website right now and Steam pre-orders on our website. Okay. Once we're 30 days out from launch, we'll be up on the online store. So we'll be on the eShop, we'll be on the Steam store, we'll be on the Xbox store, we'll be on the PS4 store.
Excellent.
So, and we have a $5 discount for pre-orders.
Fantastic.
So that'll maintain when we go to those stores as well. As far as release date, we are still shooting for July. Given the world circumstance, even though we are completely remote already, we have some slowdown. People dealing with their families, just being not as generally productive. Everybody's kind of preoccupied with the world situation. So we definitely had some slowdown. So the one thing I want to say is we're not going to rush it out if it's not ready. So we've learned from, I've done a lot of research on it, and just the obvious stories you hear about certain companies that are pushing games out just to meet a release date, and then the fans are really don't get their money's worth and are upset about it. So I think my stance is I think people will be more willing to forgive me for being a little late as long as the game's good, opposed to the other way around.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, 2K15 on the Nintendo Switch says it all, really. Is a particular story where it was famous, I think, for being rushed out. In terms of the current sort of global pandemic that's going on at the moment, obviously in terms of your own production, from what you've covered there, has there been any sort of positives in how it's affected production? Have you found that there has been maybe time to look at things differently, or how further have things affected you guys, really?
Yeah, well, I mean, the one positive thing is I think people are actually, if it's possible, more online now.
Yeah.
As far as on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, because you're not going out anymore, so people are maybe spending a little more time online than they did before. So I feel like social media-wise, our numbers have definitely gone up. I mean, we had our best day ever yesterday when we announced Matt and Brian. I mean, and those two are like internet sensations. So we saw that coming a little bit, but not nearly, we were even blown away. Like most website visits we've ever had were yesterday. So that's the positive end of it. I would love to have had the game out right now. That would have been great, because I think the video game industry has actually done really well in the last couple of weeks. So if we could have gotten done a little quicker, that would have been great. But that's really the positives. The negatives haven't been terrible. It's just, like I said, people being a little preoccupied with it, and production taking a little bit longer than we would have liked.
No, of course, absolutely. And I mean, I think given, what the major figure sort of podcast, the major hub, those guys have done for YouTube in general, it's a win-win, really. I mean, obviously there are things that I don't want to get anyone in trouble. There are things maybe that you can't talk about. Did perhaps recent current events with WWE make it a little bit easier for those guys to come into the game speculatively, or was it always on the cards from maybe months ago?
That was a complete spur of the moment thing. They became available, and we wanted to jump on them. So
fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were at 14. We were debating. We're kind of getting over our budget already. So initially, when we came out, our market material said 12 to 16 wrestlers at launch, and we had not signed everybody at that point, and we weren't sure how much it was going to cost us to get all the wrestlers that we wanted. So we were going to go with 14. But those two came available, and they just kind of fit with what we're doing in our game. They're all about wrestling figures, retro wrestling figures, And, those two are great on social media. So from a marketing standpoint, they're awesome to have. And then Mike, again, knew Brian and Matt from before.
Mm-hmm.
And, spoke very highly of them, just their quality of character, of, as being people. And it was a no-brainer for us to get them. Just two great guys, great looks for the game. And we know they're gonna help us sell. On top of that, the added bonus is they're gonna help sell the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
They've been really cool to deal with, and again, their brand fits our brand, so it was a good synergy. Hopefully, we can give them a little bit of a rub with their podcast that they're growing, and they're kind of their new, because both of those guys were signed really, really young to WWE.
Yeah.
So it's a new thing for them as well, and how now they're responsible for their own marketing even more so than they were before.
Mm-hmm.
And they were both kind of self-made even in WWE to really push themselves. And now it's all, and I think you see that they're really excited about this opportunity too.
Mm-hmm.
Where they're out there and just trying to reinvent themselves a little bit and say they can do, maybe they have some of their own ideas that they want to push now, and we hope to help them do that.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And so in terms of yourself outside of the arcade, what are some of, as fan of, have you been a fan of wrestling through the years? Do you still keep up with it? What are some of your greatest memories as a fan? What kind of federations have you attended, any in person, those kind of things?
Yeah, so I started watching wrestling when I was probably
8. Okay.
8-ish. And I watched it religiously through probably I was 20.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I'll come and go, but I always keep up on what's going on for the most part of the major federations, you know what I mean? And, I'm a big fan of NWA currently now. And I was glad we got a relationship with them going, because I like what they're doing. Now that I'm a little older, I don't really have the 3 hours a night to spend watching wrestling.
Yeah.
Because there's other things I'm doing too,
Sure.
But I like the 1 hour stuff, and I actually watch a lot of recap shows on YouTube too.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll go back and watch good matches or good segments. But I've been a fan forever. Like I grew up on NWA. Actually, that was the first thing I watched religiously, and then I also, obviously, then I grew to watching both that and WWF at the time. But my earliest memories are old NWA, Magnum TA, Dusty Rhodes. The I Quit match with Nikita Koloff the Best of 7 match with Nikita Koloff and Magnum TA, the I Quit match, Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard. So, all that stuff I loved. And then even, WWF of the late 80s, early 90s, I love the cartoony kind of guys. I know some people give that a bad rap, but I think it maybe went a little over the top later in the 90s when everything was like Duke the Dumpster and, stuff like that. But, I love the Ultimate Warrior. People, he's gotten a little bit of a bad rap, I think, afterwards, but at the time, he looked awesome, and as a kid, he was awesome.
Yeah.
But, Jake the Snake, $1 Million Man, all the guys in WrestleFest, Demolition, Hogan, I wish Macho Man would have been in it, but, what can you do? But, and then Flair was always great, Ricky Steamboat, both in the NWA and the WWF. So, yeah, I was a huge fan all through the 80s, early 90s, and then I've continued watching it up to this day.
Excellent. In terms of just briefly, because I know we will touch on the arenas, but just briefly in terms of some of the cartoony eras of WWF, when you talk about people like Duke the Dumpster Droese and that kind of thing, what kind of characters would you like to see maybe in the future in the game, or are there characters from that era? What would you specifically, if you could have anyone, who would you love to have?
I want to get Magnum TA in. He has a current deal somewhere, so we're hopeful maybe next year we could get him in his DLC, assuming the game does well enough.
Yeah.
But really, one of the things things was important to me to show, even from our initial launch rosters, we're willing to talk to anybody if we can work something out.
Yeah.
Like we have indie guys. Warhorse won our Indie Mania tournament. We forgot to mention him earlier, but he is awesome. And I didn't even know who he was up until our indie tournament. He was nominated by fans.
Yeah.
And he ended up winning the whole thing just through our social tournament.
Amazing.
Of votes and everything. And he has a great look, fits perfect with the game.
Yeah.
But, we have guys from 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s up till today. I would love to go back and get maybe the original Nature Boy.
Yeah.
Buddy Rogers. You know what I mean? Like, I could, Gorgeous George, guys from, all eras of wrestling up till, like, going after maybe Terry Gordy and Steve Dr. Death Williams, up till today, new indie guys, if they come out. If we're successful, do another Indie Mania tournament and get the winner of that in the game. And just try to get all aspects of wrestling because, I don't have one favorite. It's like, what day of the week is it? I've had so many favorites throughout wrestling where guys go on really good runs and they're just really entertaining for a couple weeks. I would love to recreate that in the game.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. I need to ask you as well, just in regards to the arenas. So obviously the big thing as well in Retromania Wrestling is that the arenas, you have different designs and whatnot. You mentioned the association earlier with NWA. Tell us a little bit about those arenas and kind of where the custom idea came from and sort of how that developed.
Yeah, so... we started with the original WrestleFest, right? And we got that kind of style in the game. But they only really had one ring. They reskinned it with a different logo, and that was it. And, not that that's a knock. They did it in 1991. So, you know what I mean? So they did an awesome job with what they had at the time. It was revolutionary, So 30 years later, we thought we could add a few more arenas to the game. So we're taking, inspiration from other venues around the country, the old ECW arena. We took inspiration from there and did something similar to that. The ballroom in New York, we did some stuff that made it look like a ballroom kind of feel. And we have some stuff we haven't shown yet. We have we have an arena from Japan. We have a school gym. We have a beach kind of flavor arena, like a beach brawl, something like that.
Very
kind
cool.
of going on. And then Warhorse, the winner of our Indie Mania, designed something completely off the wall that I don't think's ever been seen in a wrestling game before.
Wow. Okay.
So 2D or 3D, regardless, anything. It's out there, but it's cool. It is super cool, and I think people are really gonna dig it.
Fantastic. And what kind of match types are you including in the game?
Yeah, so we have a lot of different match types. So start with singles, tag team, 6-man tag, 8-man tag, a 3-way match, a 4-way match. We call our Retro Rumble match. We have a story mode, and we have the 10 pounds of gold mode as well on top of that, which the 10 pounds of gold mode kind of incorporates several of the different match types into it. And then the story mode also incorporates a bunch of the different match types into it as well. Mm-hmm. And then with all the matches outside of singles, but all the tag matches, you can do a combination of a tornado version of it, an elimination version of it, whether or not you want to have a cage match in it. You can set the different countouts to be different time intervals. You can have a time limit on all the matches. And you can also... one other feature I forgot to say. For Retro Rumble, you can pick how many entrants you want in the ring.
Okay.
How often you want them to come out. If you want them to all start in the ring at once. So we really kind of threw out a lot of different type of match options to add as much replayability as we can.
Excellent. In terms of the actual gameplay, to cover just sort of 2 quick points. If a player chooses the same wrestler, player 1 and player 2, let's say choose Stevie Richards, are we going to have that? Is that going to be possible or no? Okay.
Not right now. I like the way WrestleFest did it.
Yeah.
And I like that you can't, it's kind of like the suspension of disbelief kind of
Sure.
thing. Like,
Yeah.
you would never see that in a wrestling match. Not that we're doing things that you couldn't do in a wrestling match. Obviously, some of our physics are a little not super off the wall, but like All-Stars kind of off the wall. But they're a little exaggerated. Put it that way. So I like the fact that only one person can be the wrestlers. You know. Now, if there's enough outcry of that, we can add different palettes like fighting games would do.
Sure.
Where you can do like, you know, Ken versus Ken, and one Ken's in blue and one's in red, and we already have that built into the system where you can do different palettes. So we can always allow that if there's enough outcry. It wouldn't be too hard to make.
No, sure.
Though, I think we're just going to keep. Yeah. You can only pick one wrestler.
Fair enough. And in terms of the progression in the gameplay, is there any kind of, in terms of, I mean, I know there's obviously a story mode, but in terms of actually achievements, could we see potentially unlockable characters? Really depends how good the poker face is, I guess, in terms of if there's secrets within the game.
Yeah, we're going to definitely try to do stuff. We probably won't have unlockable well, we might have like our 2 enhancement talent that we've been showing.
Okay.
Will probably be unlockable somehow.
Okay.
You know, and then, but we want to do, there may be some cameos in there in certain spots. You know, you're going to have to check the crowd out. You'll probably find some Easter eggs in the crowd.
Very nice.
Things like that, and there's some surprises in the story mode that will leave you some kind of fringe wrestling personalities in the story mode as well.
Excellent. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I personally, I can't wait for it. It's been an absolute delight to speak to you, I must say. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover? Anything else you wanted to let us know? Something I've forgotten perhaps before we finish? Is anything at all? Or what are you most looking forward to people enjoying about this game?
I mean, I just can't wait to get it in people's hands. You know, we've had a couple hundred people play it at this point at the different wrestling shows, comic conventions, and wrestling conventions that we've gone to. People have been able to play it. We were at PAX East. We had a couple hundred people play it over that weekend, and we're getting great feedback on it so far. So, and we definitely, and the one point I do want to drive home, we're starting to post a lot on YouTube now, and we're reading comments, and we're taking that to heart. Like, we want to make a game, and we've already made several changes based on feedback that we've gotten. So We're definitely paying attention to people. We're growing our community now. I think we just passed 65,000 people following us on social media.
Wow.
Combined on all of our platforms.
Yeah.
So we want to, you know, we're very open about our development process. So you'll see I do a weekly development vlog.
Yes.
Now I started about a couple weeks ago. And just to keep people up to date on what we're doing, the progress we're making, so people know, you know, it's not going to be a surprise. Let's say, and I alluded to earlier, if we slip a week or two or a couple weeks, we're going to keep people updated. Twice a week we're doing videos. So you guys, we're not going to leave you in the dark, and no one's going to be wondering when it's coming out. You'll know exactly where we are, and we're going to be showing progress up and through. So we're very open in that regard, and we answer as many questions as we can. So I just want to make that RetromaniaWrestling.com. You can go there for all of our information. We have a newsletter there that we haven't been sending too many of those out. We'll probably start sending a few more of those out. But you can get to our social media there: Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram at Retrosoft Studio.
Excellent. There were two things on my mind actually, very briefly. The first was in terms of obviously digital content. I know coming to all the different platforms. Would it be dependent on success to see a physical release at some stage, either in the UK or the US?
Yeah, so we're talking to a couple companies now.
Okay.
So it's nothing's definite.
Sure.
Yeah, the way these companies work is they typically want to see how your digital release goes. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Depending on how the digital release goes, they'll be more or less interested in us as far as doing a physical.
Yeah.
But, you know, based on the way we're trending, I would say, on what we've been showing, we've got a pretty good following at this point. So, you know, I would say it's more likely than not that we'll get a physical at some point. But again, that's based on success of our digital launch.
No, absolutely. The only thing finally to ask briefly was in your development blog, there's an arcade machine behind you
Yep.
to your right. What is that machine? I'm trying to figure it out.
Yeah, so that is an At Games Legends Ultimate arcade machine.
Nice.
So, and then they we've been taking that. But the plan was we were going to be touring with that, but kind of everything got shut down.
Yeah.
So we did take it to PAX with us, but it is it's an all-purpose arcade machine. It comes shipped with like 300 different games on it, and we're in the process of making our game compatible with it as well. So we reskinned it with our Retromania logos on it and our Retromania artwork on it. So we'll probably offer a kit or something to reskin it at some point if you're interested. But check it out. If you look up At Games Legends Ultimate on YouTube, there's a great community there, a ton of great reviews on that machine. They are constantly updating their firmware. They have a lot of cool stuff like bring your own games where you can put additional games on it that don't come with it, and a bunch of other cool stuff. So I highly recommend checking that out.
Fantastic. Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the time. I normally don't do interviews this long, but as I say, it's one of those occasions where it was just an absolute pleasure to get to speak to you about gaming and wrestling. So thank you so much. Hopefully you guys out there enjoyed that. Remember, of course, Retromania Wrestling, PC, Nintendo Switch, PS4 and Xbox One, and heading there in July. Keep up to date with their social media, their vlogs, their updates and whatnot. And everyone back in the studio, let's have a listen to this.